inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Salawat.
اللهم
Allahumma salli
صل
ala
على
Muhammad wa
محمد
ali
وآل
Muhammad ajil
محمد
faraja.
وعجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة. هو الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار. عزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له أسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له أسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم وفرجنا به. با کسب اجازت آقای امام زماننا انشاءالله استاد مجلس عزا for امام حسین و اهل بیت رسول الله انشاءالله تحت نظر آقای امام زمان everybody is safe and sound from the disease that is prevalent in the world right now. and inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala به حرمت آقای امام زمان به ما رخصت به ما permission to benefit from this majlis and be the azadar for Mawla Imam Hussein and Ahl Bayt Peygamber sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. صدق الله العلي العظيم. بسم الله.
وآل محمد بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات.
اللهم
صل على محمد و آل محمد. For the love of the Holy Prophet and his holy family, please recite the second salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the reappearance of our awaited Savior, please recite the third salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The marsiya that I have tonight represents the events that took place early during this morning. So today is the first of Safar, and this was the time when the Ahl Bayt of Imam Hussein alayhi salam were taken as captives to the court of Yazid. So the Marsiya describes this event as Subh Mahshar. So the poet tries to capture the events that took place when the family was taken as prisoners in front of Yazid. But Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Jus panjetan kisi se tawalla na chahiye غیر از خدا کسی کا بھروسہ، غیر از خدا کسی کا بھروسہ نہ چاہیے، ایک در پہ بیٹھ کر ہے توکل کریم پر، اللہ کے فقیر کو پھیرا، اللہ کے فقیر کو پھیرا نہ چاہیے، صغرا نے شاہدی کو لکھا خط تو بھیجیے، کر چاہتے نہیں ہمیں اچھا نہ چاہیے، دو بیٹیاں تو پاس ہو ایک جاں بلب بعید، میں سچ کہوں یہ آپ کو بابا، میں سچ کہوں یہ آپ کو بابا نہ چاہیے، کہتی تھی فضا شام میں بازاریوں ہٹو، آلے رسول پر ستم ایسا نہ چاہیے، یہ کون بیبیاں ہیں تم کو خبر نہیں، زہرا کی بیٹیوں کا تماشا، زہرا کی بیٹیوں کا تماشا نہ چاہیے، مرقع چراغ داغ سے روشن رہے انیس، شب کو اکیلے گھر میں اندھیرا، شب کو اکیلے گھر میں اندھیرا نہ چاہیے، جز پنجتن کسی سے، صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد۔ محشر کی صبح آج نمایاں ہے شام میں، کنبا شفیع حشر کا ہے اژدہام میں، سرننگے روح فاطمہ ہے تمام میں، قاسان ذوالجلال بلوایام میں، جبریل کی خزادیاں تشریف لائی ہے، مشکل کشا کی بیٹیاں بندی میں آئی ہے، مشکل کشا کی بیٹیاں بندی میں آئی ہیں بیچ میں کھلے ہوئے آلے ابا کے سر، نیزوں پہ ان کے گرد ہے فوج خدا کے سر، بچوں کے سر بزرگوں کے سر، اقربا کے سر روتے ہیں وارثوں کے سروں کو دکھا کے سر، سر رکھ کے زانوؤں پہ جو وارث کو روتے ہیں، ظالم سروں میں نیزوں کی نوکیں چبوتے ہیں، ظالم سروں میں نیزوں کی نوکیں چبوتے ہیں، نیزے پہر ملا کے چمکتا ہے کھلال، بکھرے ہوئے ہیں چاند سے منہ پر جھنڈو لبال، اولاد والے کہتے ہیں اے رب ذوالجلال، اس بے زباں کے خون کا کس نے لیا وبال، گردش میں ہائے ہائے یہ کس کا ستارہ ہے، لے کر بلائیں کہتی تھی بانو ہمارا ہے، لے کر بلائیں کہتی تھی بانو ہمارا ہے، ناگاہ ہوا یزید کا دروازہ آشکار، حاضر نقیب و حاجب و دربان و چوبدار، تیغ علم کیے ہوئے جلاد نابکار، مجرائی بے حساب تماشائی بے شمار، ایوان میں بھی رقص کا ساما تمام تھا، پر انتظار عطرت خیر الانام تھا، پر انتظار عطرت خیر الانام تھا۔ بولے سب ایک بار وہ آئے گناہ گار، آئے قصوروار وہ آئے گناہ گار، جلاد و ہوشیار وہ آئے گناہ گار، وہ آئے بے دیار وہ آئے گناہ گار، جب سے کہ آسمان خدا نے بنائے ہیں، آل رسول آج ہی بندی میں آئے ہیں، آل رسول آج ہی بندی میں آئے ہیں۔ روکا عمر نے بڑھ کے علم کو سپاہ کو، مجرا پرا جمع کے کیا بارگاہ کو، اور ہنس کے دیکھا لے رسالت پناہ کو، آواز دی نبی رہے شیر الہ کو، ہاں ہاں میں ہار روکنا اونٹوں کا تھامنا، اب ہے یزید کے در دولت کا سامنا، اب ہے یزید کے در دولت کا سامنا۔ سننا یہ تھا کہ سب کے جگر پر چھری چلی، اونٹوں سے اتری بیبیاں کہہ کہہ کے یا علی، آنکھیں پھرا کے رہ گئی بانوں کی لاڈلی، روح حسین کو ہوئی جنت میں بے کلی، طاقت بدن کی گھٹ گئی اور ضعف بڑھ گیا، اترے جو بے سہارے تو دم سب کا چڑھ گیا، اترے جو بے سہارے تو دم سب کا چڑھ گیا، مظلومیت سے روکے یہ مظلوموں نے کہا، حاکم کی یہ خوشی ہے تو پھر عذر ہم کو کیا، بازار میں تو پھر چکے بے مخنہ اور ردا، آساں کرے گا مشکل دربار بھی خدا، حاضر ہے لے چلو ہمیں گمراہ ہو لے چلو، سر پر نہیں حسین جہاں چاہو لے چلو، سر پر نہیں حسین جہاں چاہو لے چلو، کچھ اب بھی اوڑھنے کے لیے دو گے یا نہیں، حاکم کا سامنا ہو سروں پر ردا نہیں، لائے ہو اپنے شہر میں یہ بھی حیا نہیں، کیسے عرب ہو تم کو حمیت ذرا نہیں، سیدانیوں کی کچھ تو مدارات چاہیے، چادر بجائے ہدیہ سوغات چاہیے، چادر بجائے ہدیہ سوغات چاہیے، وہ بولے اب قبول کوئی التجا نہیں، سب سے حیا ہے پر ہمیں تم سے حیا نہیں، حاکم کے دشمنوں پر درہم روا نہیں، مجرم کو احتیاج لباس و ردا نہیں، آلودہ وارثوں کے لہو سے جبیں تو ہے، چہروں پر اور خاک لگا لو زمیں تو ہے، چہروں پر اور خاک لگا لو زمیں تو ہے، پر اتنا ڈھیرو وارثوں کے سر سے پوچھ لے، شاہ امم کے فرق منور سے پوچھ لے، دربار جانے کو علی اکبر سے پوچھ لے، عباس ابن حیدر صفدر سے پوچھ لے، मुर्दा ना समझो जिंदा ये हैदर के प्यारे हैं, मुख्तार हम नहीं है ये मालिक हमारे हैं, मुख्तार हम नहीं है ये मालिक हमारे हैं। नेज़ों पर नस्ब थे जो शहीदों के सर तमाम, ज़ैनब ने बढ़ के भाई के सर को किया सलाम। चिल्लाई क्यों ज़बी है खुदा शाह तशना काम, मर्जी है क्या हुजूर की कहते हैं क्या इमाम। दरबार मिट गया तेरा खूरन में बह गया, मेरे लिए यजीद का दरबार रह गया, मेरे लिए यजीद का दरबार रह गया। नामे हुसैन लेके जो बच्चे दहलते हैं, सज्जाद सर झुकाए हुए हाथ मलते हैं। बोलो हुसैन बोलो के अब दम निकलते हैं, आई निदा के तुम भी चलो हम भी चलते हैं। इस दम जो सर खुले हुए दरबार जाओगी, उम्मत के बख्शवाने को महशर में आओगी, उम्मत के बख्शवाने को महशर में आओगी। सलवात अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद व आलि मुहम्मद।
Inshallah, we take a break now for Maghrib prayers. We will start back again about 8 o'clock, inshallah, with salam, and then Maulana will start around 8:10. So we'll see, inshallah, around 8 o'clock. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. con
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Inshallah, we'll be starting in the next couple of minutes with salam by Brother Mohsin with salawat. Allahumma salli
اللهم
ala
صل
Muhammad
على
wa ali
محمد
Muhammad
وآل
ajal
محمد.
farajahu. So, Mohsin, you can start in about a couple of minutes, inshallah, okay?
انشاءاللہ. اور محمد وآل محمد صلوات. اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد. اور خوشنودی امام زمانہ بلند ترین صلوات. اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد. سکینہ قید ہو کر شام کے زنداں میں جب آئی سکینہ قید ہو کر شام کے زنداں میں جب آئی وہ بچی اس اندھیرے گھر کی تاریکی سے گھبرائی مقدر نے عجب آفت کی پہلی رات دکھلائی زمین تو فرش تھی سایہ فگن تھا چرخ مینائی پھوپھی کے پاس رہتی تھی ناما کے پاس سوتی تھی برہنا سے کھڑے زندہ کے دروازے پر روتی تھی ادھر سے جو گزرتا تھا تو یہ کہتی تھی سنتا جا میں بے کس قید میں ہوں ایک یہی پیغام ہے میرا اگر بابا ملے تجھ کو تو یوں کہیو قسم کھا کھا سکینہ پر مصیبت ہے خبر لو اے شہ والا جو تجھ سے یہ کہیں خیمے میں سوتا چھوڑ آیا ہوں تو کہیو درے زنداں پہ روتا چھوڑ آیا ہوں سکینہ بر محمد والے محمد صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
So it's quick announcements before Maulana join us. Inshallah, we'll be changing the time from next week for weekend majalis for Friday and Saturday. As you all know, the Maghrib time is coming earlier and earlier. So inshallah, for next weekend, we'll start majlis after Maghrib prayer. So you guys can pray on time, and then we'll start majlis with Quran recitation by Brother Mustafa at 8 o'clock, followed by Marcia, Salam, and then Maulana's speech, inshallah. So remember, for next week, time's changing, and we'll be starting at 8 o'clock with Quran recitation. Just a reminder about Imam Al-Zaman Fund. Please make contribution to Imam Al-Zaman Fund and other programs of the center to support the programs, maintenance of the center and cemetery. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And also reminder for Urdu majlis tomorrow, Sunday, at starting at 1:45, be addressed by Maulana Shaykh Abdi. We'll start at 1:45 with the Quran recitation, Hadith Kisa, Marcia, and his majlis in Urdu, inshallah. Hussein, you want to recite a few sentences or somebody before Maulana join us?
Inshallah. بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللهم صل على
محمد وآل محمد أجل فرجهم.
آل رسول کوچو بازار یا علی آل رسول کوچو بازار یا علی زہرا کی بیٹی شام کا دربار یا علی آل رسول کوچو بازار یا علی بھیا جو مر گیا ہے تو بہنا اداس ہے، بھیا جو مر گیا ہے تو بہنا اداس ہے، جیون نراش ہو گیا من بد حواس ہے، جیون نراش ہو گیا من بد حواس ہے، آشائیں مٹ چکی نہیں جینے کی آس ہے، آشائیں مٹ چکی نہیں جینے کی آس ہے، بھائی کی موت درد دل آزار یا علی، آل رسول کوچاؤ بازار یا علی، زہرا کی بیٹی شام کا دربار یا علی، عباس جب تلک تھے تھا زینب کو اطمینان، عباس جب تلک تھے تھا زینب کو اطمینان، خالق کے بعد بھائی کا تھا ایک نگہبان، بھائی خالق کے بعد بھائی کا تھا ایک نگہبان، بے آس ہو گئی جو گرا فوج کا نشان، بے آس ہو گئی جو گرا فوج کا نشان، اب کیا ہو مر گئے جو علمدار یا علی، اب کیا ہو مر گئے جو علمدار یا علی، آل رسول کوچاؤ بازار یا علی، آل رسول کوچاؤ بازار یا علی، زہرا کی بیٹی شام کا دربار یا علی، آل رسول کوچاؤ بازار یا علی، صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Inshallah, we just can start whenever you're ready. Jazakumullah khair.
بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات، اللہم صلی
Allahumma
علی
salli ala
محمد
Muhammad
و
wa
آل
ali
محمد
Muhammad.
وعجل.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد، اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, please recite a second loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. The topic that we will be discussing tonight, inshallah, is the topic of spiritual freedom. When we look at the movement of Imam al-Hussein, when we look at his journey going from Medina to Mecca, and from Mecca heading towards the city of Kufa, and finally arriving in the land and in the desert and plains of Karbala, you find that the Imam has many conversations with different individuals who know him. Some of them are his relatives, some of them are his companions, some are individuals who are tied to him with family ties, others, they are simply followers of him and companions of his. And in these conversations that Imam al-Hussein is having with different individuals, you find that sometimes in the middle of the conversation, he will mention a sentence or two that is more than just a sentence within that bigger conversation. It is more so an introduction and a way of introducing his whole movement. Some of these lines we've heard of, for example, we read that Imam al-Hussein, before heading out towards Kufa, he said famously, "Inni lam akhruj ashiran wala batira." I am not leaving to create corruption. I am not leaving to gather people around myself. The reason why I am leaving, an amura bil ma'ruf wa anha anil munkar. I am leaving to enjoin the good and forbid the evil because of the corruption that has entered into the religion of my grandfather, and I want to bring about Islah within the religion of my grandfather. So some of the lines that the Imam has mentioned, they are fundamental. They are more than just a line in a conversation. But when you look at these conversations that Imam al-Hussein is having with different individuals, whether it's before the 10th of Muharram or even on the 10th of Muharram, as we know, the Imam had multiple conversations also on the 10th of Muharram as well, you find that certain themes come up over and over again in the words of Abu Abdullah. There are certain concepts that come up over and over again in the words of Abu Abdullah. And when these words and themes and concepts are reiterated, they are reoccurring themes in the words of the Imam, you can understand that these are central to his movement. You can understand that these words and these concepts are concepts that the Imam is truly fighting for. Amongst those concepts that are mentioned multiple times in the words of Abu Abdullah is the concept of hurriyah, the concept of freedom. And you find this before the 10th of Muharram. You also find this on the 10th of Muharram as well. You find on the 10th of Muharram, the Imam says openly, وَيْحَكُمْ يَا شِيعَةَ آلَ أَبِي سُفْيَانَ, woe to you, O followers of Abu Sufyan, إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَكُمْ دِينٌ وَلَا تَخَافُونَ الْمَعَادِ. If you are not afraid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَكُونُوا أَحْرَارًا فِي دُنْيَاكُمْ, then at least be free individuals when it comes to your dunya, when it comes to the way you do things in this world. This is the hurriya that Imam al-Hussein is speaking about. Then again, you find when Imam al-Hussein wants to make it clear that he will never give bay'ah to someone like Yazid, he calls out, he says, أَلَا وَإِنَّ الدَّعِي إِبْنَ الدَّعِي قَدْ رَكَزَ بَيْنَ اثْنَتَيْنِ. He says this person, Yazid, who comes from a illegitimate lineage, he has placed us between two options. بين السلة والذلة. He has placed us between silla meaning when you take the sword out from its cover, meaning war, meaning battle. بين السلة والذلة, and humiliation. And then he famously mentioned and proclaimed, وَهَيْهَاتَ مِنَّا الذِّلَّةِ, and humiliation is far from us. We will never agree to anything that brings about our humiliation. So you find again the Imam is talking about this freedom that's coming up, that he will never be humiliated. And of course, this freedom that he is referring to, it's very clear that he's not referring to the normal type of freedom that we use in our day-to-day conversations, the physical freedom, because at the end of the day, we know that Imam al-Hussein, he was made shaheed in the plains of Karbala. From a physical perspective, he was not free at all. From a physical perspective, he wanted to move towards Kufa, but Hur did not allow him. In fact, he wanted to go other places and still Hur did not allow him to do so. Yes? Therefore, the freedom that Imam al-Hussein is referring to, no doubt, is a spiritual type of freedom. It is not the physical type of freedom that you and I might already enjoy in our day-to-day lives. What is this spiritual freedom and what dimensions does it have? Tonight, inshallah, we intend to delve into this topic by posing the following questions and providing answers to them, inshallah. The first question that comes to mind is, what is the spiritual freedom? And when you speak about the spiritual freedom, what are you trying to be freed from? This is a question we have to answer. Number two is, when we talk about the spiritual freedom, what are the different levels to spiritual freedom? And what are the different levels when it comes to someone who loses their spiritual freedom? Number three, what example do we have from Islamic history of an individual who was there in the plains of Karbala, and he was functioning in the plains of Karbala because he had lost his spiritual freedom? And number four, which marja of our maraji' was it? Which alim of our ulama was it in the city of Najaf that had the utmost spiritual freedom, that he took himself and his students and he sat in the class of one of his peers, and he did this out of the spiritual freedom that he had built after years of working on himself? Tonight, inshallah, we will delve into these questions and provide answers to them with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. In order to delve into this topic, the first thing that we need to understand is the concept of freedom itself. If you were to go around right now and ask individuals, what is it that they mean by the concept of freedom? You and I, we would refer to ourselves as free individuals. If someone were to ask us, what does it mean that you are a free individual? At a very basic level, the answer that we would give to them is this, that it means I'm free, meaning that whatever I choose in my life, I can do. No one can stop me from doing what I decide to do. If I decide to leave the house right now, no one can stop me. If I decide to come back, no one can stop me. If I decide to have this food or that food be a part of this activity or that activity, nobody can stop me. This is normally the way that we would define freedom. And therefore, if you pay attention to it, this freedom, it revolves around your desires, yes? Meaning that whatever it is that you desire, you can then act upon it, and nobody can stop you, nobody can question you at that point. In Islam, and this is where the discussion starts to take a turn now. In Islam, what we are taught is that the same desire that can be the source of your freedom, meaning that whatever you want to do, you actually do it. The same freedom that is the source of your freedom, the same desires that are source of your freedom, Islam teaches us that these same desires of ours can become the source of our captivity. They can make us lose our spiritual freedom, these same desires. So to delve into this, let me give you a very basic example that many of us deal with on a day-to-day basis. The first time that someone has coffee, first time you feel down and you want to have some coffee, you want to feel more energetic, so you pour this coffee for yourself and you drink a little bit of it and you feel more energetic. This is fine. When you continue to fulfill this desire, this deed of drinking coffee goes from just being a preference to being a habit now. Meaning that consistently you're drinking this coffee now, yes? It's something that you do almost every morning. And if you continue down this line, you continue to fulfill this desire of yours without any limitations at all, then all of a sudden you will find that this preference turned into a habit, now it turns into an addiction. Meaning that it reaches a point that if you don't drink the coffee, now that becomes a problem for you. Yes. Now, if you don't drink the coffee, you are not even able to function anymore. This is not how it started out. Initially, it started out as an innocent desire. But this desire of yours that was essentially the source of your freedom, whenever you wanted, you could drink your coffee. This is what you defined freedom as. This same source of your freedom, this desire to drink the coffee, because you fulfilled it so much without any limitations, it went from a preference to turning into a habit to turning into an addiction. Therefore, Islam teaches us that any of our desires are like this as well. Any of our desires are such that if you continue to fulfill them without any limitations, they start to go from being a preference to a habit to an addiction. The problem, however, that we deal with is this, we live in a society that within this society, they only have words that refer to addictions for certain desires that turn into addictions. They don't have words for all sorts of desires that turn into addictions. When you use the word addiction right now in English, what comes to mind? Usually it's a specific substance, for example, yes? A substance that brings you a special feeling. It might bring you a sense of happiness, a superficial sense of happiness and whatnot. So it's limited to some substance. Therefore, if you have other types of addictions, the culture and the society that we live in does not have the words to explain that this is an addiction. But from the perspective of Islam, any desire of yours, if you continue to fulfill it over and over again, it can turn into an addiction. Yes? In the culture we live in, yes, if you drink too much alcohol, they say this person is addicted to alcohol now. Yes? He's an alcoholic. If there is someone who works too much, they say this person is a workaholic, for example. Some things we have words for within this culture and the language that we live in. But then there are many things, there are many times where a person is continuously fulfilling his desire, but the culture that we live in, they don't have any words to explain that this is an addiction, whereas Islam sees this as an addiction. For example, a person who's willing to do anything and everything to gain more money around him. He's willing to ruin the lives of thousands of people just to have more money in his bank account. This person, from the society that we live in, they would refer to this person as someone who is financially successful. But from the Islamic perspective, this person is sick. This person has an illness, that his desire for money has grown to a point he's willing to do anything, yes, to draw more money his way. I'll give you another example. Someone who is willing to do anything to bring more fame their way, to grab the attention of the people. They're willing to dress in any way to grab the attention of the people. Within this society, they will say this person is bold. This person is a free individual. From the perspective of Islam, this person is sick. They are ill. There is a disease within them. Yes? And so on and so forth. Therefore, Islam is saying any desire that you take and you fulfill it until it reaches the point that you have to do it, even if deep down you don't want to do it, you feel like you have to do it. It's so compelling. You can't say no to yourself anymore. This has now turned into an addiction for you. And this is where the concept of spiritual freedom comes into the picture. Yes? So what does Islam provide? What does Islam tell us about how we can attain the spiritual freedom? I understand that if I don't stop my desires, it will take away my spiritual freedom. What am I supposed to do then? It might seem like a little bit of a contradiction. But then what Islam teaches us is this, that if you want to attain your spiritual freedom, you have to limit yourself and your desires. Yes? Freedom and limitation, from the Islamic perspective, they come together. If you want spiritual freedom, you have to limit the desires that you have. This might seem like a contradiction, but it's not a contradiction. What does that mean? Islam says, listen, the desires you have, you can only fulfill them to a certain degree, to a certain extent. If you continue to fulfill them, then they will take away your spiritual freedom. The only way to continue to have your spiritual freedom is what? Is to limit these desires. You have a desire to engage with the opposite gender. There is a limitation for that. If you continue beyond that, such that you're looking at whatever you're looking at, yes, you're watching whatever you're watching. When someone passes by, you cannot lower your gaze. You are now dealing with a situation where you are sick. You are losing your spiritual freedom. If you want to regain your spiritual freedom, you have to start limiting your desires. This is what Islam teaches us when it comes to spiritual freedom and the way to attain it. If somebody does not do this, what happens? They lose their spiritual freedom. What that means is this, that their desires now control them. Even if deep down they don't want to do something, they still will end up doing it. A good example of this, brothers and sisters, is what we find in the society that we're living in. In the society that we're living in, There will be individuals, they love their families very much. Yes, sometimes this happens with men within, and God forbid, na'udhu billah, it happens in our communities. Yes, a man who loves his family, but because he has fulfilled his desires so much, now that there is this desire in him with regards to the opposite gender, even though deep down he doesn't want to do this, even though deep down he knows that this is going to hurt him, still he ends up performing a particular deed that hurts himself and hurts his whole family. Why? Because this person has already lost his spiritual freedom. His desires control him. His desires tell him where to go and where not to go. Even if he doesn't want to do it, his desires will compel him to go. This is the first level of losing your spiritual freedom, that your desires push you to do things even if you do not want to do them. Then if someone continues down this route, then they reach the second level of spiritual freedom, or forgive me, the second level of losing your spiritual freedom, the second level of spiritual captivity, I should say. And this second level is not good. It's not better. Normally, when you go from level 1 to level 2, that's a good thing. This is level 1, you're going to level 2. It's like the levels of Jahannam. Yes, the more levels you go through, the worse it gets. So this person is getting worse now. He goes from this first level to the second level. What is the second level? And what does the Quran tell us about the second level? The second level of losing your spiritual freedom is when a person reaches a point that shaitan knows he will already commit sins. He will already commit haram. That's not his worry. He's not worried about that. Shaitan will now come to him and whisper in his ears and give him tips on how to create corruption, on what to do so that he can hurt this person even more. Yes, sometimes you have troublemakers within the community. You have individuals who they use their tongues, unfortunately. They backbite, they spread rumors, right? They spread misinformation. Then sometimes if this person continues down this road and does it for a long time, they reach a point where shaitan comes to them and says, you're going to do the backbiting anyways, but say this about him, it will hurt him or her even more. As these are real things that we deal with, unfortunately, in our communities. Yes, although it's minorities, but this is what we deal with at times, unfortunately. This person reaches a point where shaitan knows his desires are going to get the best of him. Shaitan is only there to tell him how to create even more corruption. The verses of the Quran were revealed that the Muslimin, they have to do dhibh of the animal. They have to do dhibh of the animal before they can have it. They have to slaughter this animal properly. Then the mushrikeen of Quraysh, they wanted to do jadal. They wanted to argue with the Prophet. But instead of just arguing, the Quran says shaitan would come and teach them how to argue. And so they said, listen, O Muslimin, you all say that your Prophet has said that if you want to have a piece of meat, that this meat has to be slaughtered properly. The animal has to be slaughtered properly. Is that correct? They said, yes, this is what our Prophet has said. And that the name of Allah needs to be mentioned upon this animal when the slaughtering is happening. Is this correct? Yes, this is correct. They said, okay. And shaitan, the verses of the Quran say this is what shaitan taught them. That yes, they said to the Muslimin, listen, we eat the type of meat that not only is the name of Allah mentioned on it, in fact, it's even better than that. It's the animal that God himself has slaughtered. They said, what do you mean? An animal God himself has slaughtered? This makes no sense. They said, no, when an animal falls and he's dead, a mayta, when he's dead, what does that mean? Who took the life of this animal? They said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took the life of this animal. They said, yes, we eat the dead animal, and this dead animal is an animal that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has slaughtered for us. And the Quran says, وَإِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ لَيُوحُونَ إِلَىٰ أَوْلِيَائِهِمْ. And the shayateen come to his close friends, to their close friends, and they do wahy. They tell them what to say, لِيُجَادِلُوكُمْ, so that they can then come and argue with you. These thoughts that come to the minds of these individuals, don't think it's a coincidence. No, sometimes there's a shaitan who's telling them these thoughts. Some of the people you look around in this world that we live in, sometimes politicians, other individuals, we might assume that they're just normal human beings. The reality is some of them have caused so much corruption that now shaitan comes to them and tells them what to do, to create even more corruption. Yes, he comes and tells them what to do to hurt the people even more than they have before. This is the second level of losing one's spiritual freedom. Moving on to the third level, inshallah. Please recite a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. The third level of losing one's spiritual freedom goes even beyond this. Not only this person will commit haram, not only will shaitan give him tips, now the shaitan lives with this individual. Meaning that day and night, while he is breathing, while he is sleeping, while he gets up to eat, while he gets up to do whatever he wants to do in his day-to-day activities, this shaitan is with him day to day. This shaitan is with him 24/7. And the Quran speaks of this in two occasions. One of them is in Surah Fussilat, verses 37 to 39. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ نُقَيِّضْ لَهُ شَيْطَانًا فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. Whoever turns away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what do? We assign a shaitan for him. We assign a specific shaitan for him. You might say, well, there's only one shaitan. No, there's one Iblis. And then he has his army, his shayateen al-insi wal-jinn. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, then a shaitan comes and starts living with this person. فَهُوَ لَهُ قَرِينٌ. Qareen means when two things come beside one another, right? Muqarin means when two things are parallel with one another. Qareen meaning an acquaintance. He becomes the acquaintance of this individual, but he doesn't realize it. The individual, the human being, he doesn't realize it. He doesn't know he has a shaitan with him, living and breathing with him and whispering in his ear every single second. He doesn't know. When does he find out about this? On the day of judgment. On the day of judgment, he shows up. حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءَنَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, until this person comes to us on the day of judgment. قَالَ يَا لَيْتِ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكَ بُعْدَ الْمَشْرِقَيْنِ. Then all of a sudden he realizes this shaitan was living with him. He says, I wish that between you and me was the distance of the east and the west. Meaning that this is such a terrible acquaintance for him. He wishes he had never even been around such a thing. Not knowing his whole life he was living with this shaitan. فَبِئْسَ الْقَرِينُ. What a terrible acquaintance you were for me. Yes, this is the third level of losing spiritual freedom, where the shaitan now lives with this individual. And if you want a great example, brothers and sisters, of someone who lost his spiritual freedom, and because of that, even though he didn't want to commit a huge sin, even though he didn't want to commit a major sin, he still was forced to by his own desires to do so, there is probably no example better than an individual by the name of Umar ibn Sa'd in the plains of Karbala. Umar ibn Sa'd was the commander of the army that came from Kufa to fight in the plains of Karbala. Yes, Yazid never came into Karbala. Yazid was in his place in Sham. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad also did not come to Karbala. He was in his palace in Kufa. The one person that did come to Karbala was who? It was Umar ibn Sa'd. But Umar ibn Sa'd initially, he wasn't even supposed to come to Karbala. See what your desires do to you. See what losing your spiritual freedom does to you, brothers and sisters. Umar ibn Sa'd, initially, he didn't even want to kill the son of Fatima. He had an army. He was preparing to go out to the city of Ray. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad had given him the promise that if you want to go and become the governor of Ray, that you have to go up and fight against Hussein. You have to take the life of Hussein. He just wanted to be the governor of Ray. He just wanted to be the one in charge in Ray, who gets taxes from people, and he has wealth and authority at his disposal. This is what Umar ibn Sa'd wanted for himself. He didn't want to kill Hussein initially. But what happened? Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad dangled his desires in front of him so much. And because Umar ibn Sa'd had already lost his spiritual freedom, he reached a point where the moment he wanted to say no to Ubaydullah and to this mission, Ubaydullah would remind him, if you say no to me, there is going to be no governorship of Ray for you. You will never be the governor of Ray if you say no to me. And what happened? Umar ibn Sa'd finally he accepted, and he took his army from Kufa, an army that has a number we don't know exactly about. Some have said 4,000, 10,000, 15,000. Different numbers have been mentioned, and higher numbers have been mentioned as well. That he brought this army to the plains of Karbala. But here's the point, brothers and sisters. When Umar ibn Sa'd comes into the plains of Karbala in history, what we find is that he entered into Karbala on the 2nd of Muharram. Most historians say he entered on the 2nd of Muharram. And we know Imam al-Hussein did not become Shaheed until the 10th of Muharram. The question is this: from the 2nd of Muharram till the 10th of Muharram, what was happening? We know that there were more troops coming and joining the army of Umar ibn Sa'd. But why didn't Umar ibn Sa'd just attack on the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th? Why did it even take until the 7th of Muharram to even cut off the water from the tents of Abu Abdullah? Because throughout this time, Umar ibn Sa'd, who was a relative with some of those who were in the caravan of Imam al-Hussein, he was trying to come up with a peace treaty between Hussein and Yazid. He was trying to negotiate something between Hussein and Yazid. He was hoping that there could be some sort of a deal that Hussein could not be killed, and at the same time Yazid would be happy. Still, even in the plains of Karbala, you find historical narrations that he had conversations with Imam al-Hussein. And Imam al-Hussein tells him, if you want money, I will give you money. And if you want this, I will give you this. But you can tell Umar ibn Sa'd is so stuck with wanting to become the governor of Ray that there is nothing he can do now. He has lost his spiritual freedom at this point. This continued up until a point came where then Umar ibn Sa'd received a letter from Ubaidullah. Ubaidullah wrote him a letter from Kufa. He said, listen, if you won't get the job done with Hussein, let me know. This is the son of Dhil Jawshan. This is Shimr ibn Dhil Jawshan. He will take care of Hussein if you're not going to do it. And what did Umar ibn Sa'd do? He said, no, 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 no. I want to become the governor of Ray. This same one who didn't want to kill the son of Fatima, what happened? He became the first one on the 10th of Muharram that he took the arrow and he shot it towards the tents of Abu Abdullah. And he ordered his riders and his horses to attack the tents of Abu Abdullah. And this is the same person who set the tents on fire on the 10th of Muharram. And the same person who ordered that the body of Hussein and his companions be trampled on the 10th of Muharram. This same Umar ibn Sa'd who didn't want to do any of these things, his desires forced him to end up doing these deeds. This is an example of a person who lost his spiritual freedom, and the moment he lost it, imagine what a terrible fate he decided for himself. Because it was not up to him anymore. He had lost his spiritual freedom. He was doing these terrible things. Maybe deep down he would have not wanted to do them, but that doesn't matter. He had lost his spiritual freedom at this point. And that is why he is cursed. He is mal'oon. This is what happens when one loses his spiritual freedom. Then on the other hand, when someone gains this spiritual freedom, there are also levels to this as well. The first level of gaining spiritual freedom is that your desires do not get the best of you. Your desires do not force you to do anything. If you don't want to do something, if deep down you feel like it's wrong, you won't do it. Even though your desires push you to do it, you don't listen to them. Then if someone continues down this road and gains a second level of spiritual freedom, what happens is that this person, not only can he control his desires and his actions, now he can control his thoughts as well. Yes? Meaning that if he doesn't want to think about something, if he doesn't want a negative thought to enter into his mind, this person can also do that as well. And then if someone continues down this road, and this is the one that we just hear of, and ulama and urafa and scholars of ours have told us about these things, but we haven't experienced them, but we're just mentioning this just so we know the capability of the human being. That the third level of spiritual freedom is that not only you control your actions, not only you control your thoughts, but now you can control the events that happen around you in the world. You can control the other creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And this is what our Imams had. That if they wanted to, like the Prophet sallallahu wasallam alayhi, he could split the moon. He could make the tree come and speak to him, as mentioned in some of the narrations, yes? And he could perform other miracles because he had reached this high level of spiritual freedom. And if you want a wonderful example of someone who showed the utmost spiritual freedom, let us take our minds to the city of Najaf. When you go back to the city of Najaf, there was an individual by the name of Muhammad Hassan Najafi. He is known as a famous scholar within the city of Najaf and now within all of the seminaries of Islam or in the Shia school of thought as Sahibul Jawahir. He is the author of a book called Jawahirul Kalam, and this book is a very, very important and critical book of fiqh, book of jurisprudence. And he was very well known in the city of Najaf, and of course at that time the city of Najaf was of course the center of Islamic studies, yes? And there are still Islamic studies there, but at that time it was flourishing even more. So Sahib al-Jawahir one day, he used to have class in the masjid. So he comes to the masjid to teach his class, but this day he comes a bit early. And when he comes a bit early to his class, he sits there in the masjid and he sees, yes, there is this other person sitting there as well. There's other sheikh sitting there as well. And his clothing has some holes in it and it seems like he's financially struggling heavily, right? He doesn't have, his clothes aren't too presentable. It seems like he's not too wealthy. And he looks at him, he says, well, I'm sitting here and I'm early to this class of mine. Allow me to go and sit in the class of that sheikh. Let me see what he has to say. I'm wondering what he's teaching about. I don't know who he is. So he goes and he sits in the class of this other sheikh whose name is Shaykh al-Ansari. And today, if you hear about Shaykh al-Ansari, today, if you hear his name within the seminaries, everybody knows who Shaykh al-Ansari is. But at that time, they don't know who he was. He says, I went and I sat in the class of Shaykh al-Ansari, and he didn't have a big class. People didn't know him. 2 or 3 people were sitting in front of him. He was teaching a class. He says, as he was teaching, then I listened and I heard things that I've never heard before. I heard a knowledge that I've never heard before. And I listened closer. I said, this person knows things that even I don't know. I'm Sahibul Jawahir. I'm the author of this wonderful book. I have hundreds of students. But Shaykh al-Ansari knows stuff that I don't know. He says that first day passed by. The second day, I went early again. I sat in his class again. And the same thing happened again. And I see that there are things he's talking about that I've never known about. He says the second time it happened. I said, well, this is something special. He says the third time, when the third time came, I went and I waited in the masjid for my students to gather. And when my students gathered and they wanted to ask me, they wanted the class to start. They said, Ya Shaykh, if you can start the class, everybody's here, you can start the class. He said, no, today I am not going to start the class. Today I'm not going to teach anything. They said, why? You are Sahib al-Jawahir. You're this great scholar. Everyone in Najaf knows you. We all come here for your class. Why aren't you going to teach today? He said, because this sheikh that you see sitting over there, he knows more than I do. And therefore, not only you all, me and all of you, are going to go and sit in the class of Shaykh al-Ansari. Look at the spiritual freedom. We are going to go and sit in his class because what he says, the knowledge he has on this topic is more than what I have. And therefore, we have to learn from him. And they say that Sahib al-Jawahir took himself and his whole class and they sat in the class of Shaykh al-Ansari. And the same Shaykh al-Ansari, because of this, he started to be well known within the city of Najaf to the point that today, more students in the seminaries of Najaf and Qum and other cities, they study the books more so of Shaykh al-Ansari than they do the books of Sahib al-Jawahir. They study the books of that sheikh that nobody knew more than they study the books of Sahib al-Jawahir. Today, if anyone has studied at the high levels of jurisprudence within seminaries, if you tell them, they must have studied one or at least more of the books of Shaykh al-Ansari. But who was he? He was only an individual who was known because Sahibul Jawahir, this individual, went and sat in his class and people got to know him from that point onwards. This is what spiritual freedom does to you. You have to work, and I have to work for years to build this type of spiritual freedom, so that when the critical moment comes, when my Karbala shows up and your Karbala shows up, I can have the spiritual freedom to make the right decision. But the one who hasn't prepared for it, of course, if his Karbala comes up, if his Karbala presents itself, this person cannot be able to make the right decision because he has already lost his spiritual freedom. He has no freedom left anymore. Yes? If you find someone like this scholar, this marja, Muhammad Hassan Najafi, if he's able to make a decision like this in a critical moment like this, it's because he has been working on himself for years. And so do you and I. You and I also have to be working on ourselves every single day. That every day I wake up, I make a condition. Today I'm not going to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And throughout the day, I practice this thing that we call muraqabah, that I watch myself every single day. And when nighttime comes, I do a little bit of accounting of my deeds. Yes? I sit and think, how much good did I do today? And if I did anything wrong, what changes am I going to make in my lifestyle? For the love of Abu Abdullah, to change my lifestyle so I don't commit these sins anymore. This is the only way to become a true follower of Hussein. Yes, there are many who might cry for Hussein. Yes, there are many who might beat their chest for Hussein. But when the time comes, they will do injustice to some of the other followers of Hussein. The true follower of Hussein, he purifies himself every day because he knows his Karbala is going to show up, and he knows for that Karbala, he needs a strong faith. He needs his spiritual freedom. If he doesn't have his spiritual freedom, what happens? He will not be able to make the right decision on his Karbala. On his Ashura, he will not be able to make the right decision. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests him with one of the most difficult tests in his life, then all of a sudden you will see that this person is struggling. This person who was a lover of the Ahlul Bayt, then all of a sudden he's making wrong decisions. And this is scary. And we have to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. Because if it leaves it up to us and it's just us on our own, we will never be able to attain this type of spiritual freedom and spiritual purification. When you look at the verses of Surah An-Nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْلَا فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَرَحْمَتُهُ. If it wasn't for the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His grace, مَا زَكَى مِنْكُمْ مِنْ أَحَدٍ أَبَدًا. Not one of you would ever be able to purify themselves. If anyone is able to purify themselves, it's with the help and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala every single day, and we have to have a plan for our daily lives. That how am I going to change myself for the love of Abu Abdullah, so that I can obey Abu Abdullah when the right time comes. And when you look in the plains of Karbala, in the caravan of Abu Abdullah, you find that all of those who were in his caravan were individuals who had built the greatest spiritual freedom within them. Sallallahu alayka ya Abu Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya Zainab, ya al-Masa'ib. Let's join this caravan of the Ahlul Bayt. Let's join this caravan that is going on this difficult and full of musibah journey from Karbala to Kufa, and now from Kufa all the way to Sham. They say that the family of the Ahlul Bayt, they entered into the city of Sham around these times, around the first of the month of Safar. And when they entered into the city of Sham, like we mentioned last night, the whole city was decorated. Everyone was celebrating. And Yazid is boasting to everybody that these are the captives that I have been able to captivate. These are the rebels that have rebelled against me. And I was able to defeat them and massacre them in the plains of Karbala. Imagine these little children as they walk into the city of Sham. Imagine Sukayna, imagine Kulthum, imagine Zainab as they walk into the city of Sham, because they have lost their relatives, they have lost their brothers, they have lost their fathers. These little children, instead of someone being there to comfort them, you find that there are many there to mock them. There are many there who are laughing at them. There are many in the city of Sham who laugh at the pain of Sukaina. They laugh at the pain of the daughter of Hussein. And then they say that the day came that they took the family of the Ahlul Bayt and this group of captives of the Ahlul Bayt, the Usara, and they entered them into the courtyard of Yazid. And what a difficult moment this is for the family of the Ahlul Bayt, because they have been on this journey and the head of Hussein has been going ahead of them. But now on this day, they say they entered into the courtyard of Yazid and the head of Abu Abdullah is there by the hands of Yazid la'natullahi alayh. And the narrations say, and many of these are Sunni narrations, they say that Yazid la'natullahi alayh, he then started to disrespect the head of Abu Abdullah. Imagine the pain in the hearts of these women and children as they enter into this courtyard, and there are hundreds of people waiting to see who these captives are. And Yazid is boasting to everybody as these women and children of the Prophet, the grandchildren of the Prophet, they enter into the courtyard of Yazid. They walk in and they are timid and they are afraid, and Zainab is there to be brave, to defend them. And they say when they walked in, their hands were tied. And some of the daughters of Hussein, they turned to Yazid. They said, if the Prophet was here right now, how is it that your daughters and your women, they are free, their hands are not tied, but the daughters and the women of Hussein, their hands are tied in the courtyard of yours? What would you respond to the Prophet if the Prophet was here and he saw the way you are treating us, the way the women and children of the Ahlul Bayt are being taken within the courtyard of Yazid? Yes? And these women and children, they have nobody to defend them. They say the ambassador of the Roman Empire was there with Yazid. And when he saw this, the head of Abu Abdullah, he asked him, he said, whose head is this that you are disrespecting like this, O Yazid? He said, this is the head of Hussein. He said, who is this Hussein that you speak of? He said, his father is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Who's Ali ibn Abi Talib? The cousin of the Prophet. And then they say that this ambassador of the Roman Empire, he started to yell at Yazid. He said, what religion is this that you believe in? Our religion is better. We would never do to the grandchildren of our Prophet what you have done to the grandchildren of your Prophet. We would never do such a thing. This is the low level that Yazid la'natullahi alayh has reached now in his life. And they say amongst the narrations that Yazid continued to disrespect the head of Hussein as these women and children are watching these difficult moments. They say that one of these daughters of Hussein, she went behind the chair, behind the throne of Yazid, because she didn't want to see the head of Abu Abdullah. These women and children, they feel like they have no refuge, they have no shelter in the courtyard of Yazid. Who is the shelter of these women and children? Why do they feel like they have no one to protect them? Because Abbas is no longer there with them. If Abbas was there with the Ahlul Bayt, he would never allow for such thing to happen, yes? But what happened to Abbas? Abbas on the 10th of Muharram, he started to walk towards the tent of Abu Abdullah. The difficult moments that Hussein has gone through on the 10th of Muharram. Then they say he entered into the tent, he said one line to Hussein, and this one line, it broke the heart of Hussein. It made Hussein cry and cry heavily. He said, Ya akhi, halli min rukhsatin. Will you give me permission to go to the battlefield? And the narration says, فَبَكَى الْحُسَيْنُ بُكَاءً شَدِيدًا. Hussein started to cry heavily. Imagine Hussein, he knows his brother is the last stop for him. He knows his brother is the last support for him. And now Abbas has come to leave as well. How lonely does Hussein feel in these moments? فَبَكَى الْحُسَيْنُ بُكَاءً شَدِيدًا. Hussein continued to cry and cry until he turned to Abbas. He said, Ya Abbas, you're the last soldier in my army. If you leave, وَإِذَا مَضَيْتَ تَفَرَّقَ عَسْكَرِي, my whole army will fall apart. Who's going to protect these children? Who will protect Ali and al-Asghar? Who will protect Sukaina and Ruqayya and Kulthum and Zainab anymore if you go towards the battlefield? And Abbas responded to him with a line that breaks our hearts 1400 years later. He said, brother, my heart can't take it anymore. لَقَدْ ضَاقَ صَدْرِي. My heart, my chest is full of pain. I have watched Ali al-Akbar go to the battlefield. I've watched Qasim ibn al-Hassan go to the battle. I can't take it anymore, Hussein. Allow me to go before I watch your Ali al-Asghar become shaheed as well. I would never be able to take that. They say Hussein turned to him. He said, if you're going to go, فَاطْلُبْ لَهَؤُلَاءِ الْأَطْفَالِ قَلِيلًا مِنَ الْمَاءِ. Abbas, if you're going to go, at least go and grab some little bit of water for these children. They say Abbas came out of the tent. He went to the army of Kufa. He admonished them, but they wouldn't listen to him. When he came back, all of a sudden, فَسَمِعَ, he started to hear the call of the children, al-atash, al-atash. What did this call do to the heart of Abbas on the 10th of Muharram? They say he picked up a qirba, he picked up a water skin, a mashk, to bring some water with him. Then he grabbed a spear and then he rode on his horse towards the army and the troops and the Euphrates and Furat. And imagine the whole caravan of Abu Abdullah. I'm sure that they must have all have come to the front of the tents looking at Abbas. Abbas was their final hope. This is the last hope that they have. And they say Abbas rode through this army and he's made his way into the Furat and he filled up the water and the mashk and he started to come back. But all of a sudden the arrows start to come from every direction. And before you know it, the body of Abbas is covered with arrows and there is blood and wounds in every corner of his body. Until a point comes where someone severs his right arm. And in one narration, it says he continued to carry the water skin with him. He continued to carry the meshk with him until someone severed his left arm. And he continued like this until one narration says that there was one arrow that came and struck the water skin that Abbas was carrying with himself. Imagine the pain in the heart of Abbas when the water starts to drip away from this water skin. What did the heart of Abbas go through when he watches this water spill away and drip away, and he knows he has nothing to offer to the children of Hussein anymore? And then they say someone attacked him and severed his head as he fell with his face on the ground. فَوَقَعَ لِوَجْهِهِ, he fell with his face on the ground and he called out, Ya akha, adrik akha. They say Hussein, he ran into the battlefield and he sat by the body of Abbas. You can imagine that when this dirt settles, then Hussein is sitting by the body of Abbas and he is speaking to Abbas. And what exactly did they say to one another? We don't know too much of it. All we know is that when Hussein was coming back, he had his hand on his back and he said, Al-an in kasara dahri. Now my back is broken. Now the pain is too much. I can't take this pain anymore. And then we know that Hussein never brought the body of Abbas ever back to the tents because this pain was too much for Hussein on that day. He comes back to the tents. He pulls the column of the tent of Abbas and this tent falls down and all of the women and children realize that the time of captivity has begun. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all of those who have hajat, that have requests, all of those who are part of this majlis, of other majalis, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them their hajat and their requests, inshallah. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all of those who are sick and ill, dealing with sicknesses and illnesses in our communities, in all other communities, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants them health and afiyah, inshallah. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that all of those who are dealing with difficulties and calamities, with floods, what we heard of happening in Lebanon, what we hear of happening with the Muslims in China, what we hear of every day happening with our brothers and sisters in Pakistan, other places of the world, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala frees them from their difficulties, inshallah. And finally, last but not least, that He hastens the return of our beloved 12th Imam bin Nabi wa alih. Rahimallahu man qara al-Fatihata ma'a as-salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. Wa Muhammada wa musibata hai wa Muhammada wa musibata binte Fatima در بدر پھری شے کا سر کٹے رن میں بے خطا ہے شے کا سر کٹے رن میں بے خطا بنت فاطمہ در بدر پھری دیکھ کر جسے مہر تک چھپے بیریدا کرے اے فلک اسے روح مصطفیٰ جان مرتضیٰ ہے روح مصطفیٰ جان مرتضیٰ بنت فاطمہ در بدر پھری گرد غم سے منہ سب اٹا ہوا لے کے بھائی کا سر کٹا ہوا شہر شام میں ہو کے بیریدا ہائے شہر شام میں ہو کے بیریدا بنت فاطمہ در بدر پھری سرپش نہیں مجتبیٰ نہیں مرتضیٰ نہیں مصطفیٰ نہیں ہو کے بے نوا کیوں نہ پھر بھلا ہے ہو کے بے نوا کیوں نہ پھر بھلا بنت فاطمہ در بدر پھری زلزلے میں ہو کیوں نہ نینوا کیوں نہ پھر ملے دشت کربلا ہائے فوج کی چھین لی ردا ہائے فوج کی چھین لی ردا بنت فاطمہ در بدر پھری دم گھٹا ہوا دل رندھا ہوا گھر لٹا ہوا سر کھلا ہوا چہرے پر ملے خاک کربلا ہے چہرے پر ملے خاک کربلا بنت فاطمہ در بدر پھری روئیں شاہ کو دشت میں نبی اور گلے ملے ہنس کے امتی پردے میں رہے ہند با وفا پردے میں رہے ہند با وفا بنت فاطمہ در بدر پھری ہونا کس طرح شوکت حزین رنج سے لہو قلب مومنین بے کفن رہے شاہ کربلا بے کفن رہے شاہ کربلا بنت فاطمہ در بدر پھرے وا محمدہ وا مصیبتا بنت فاطمہ در بدر پھرے یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین.
محسن برادر یار محمد یو تھے
یا حسین آنکه نوشید می از جام بلا کیست حسین آنکه کوشید به یاری خدا کیست حسین آنکه از کعبه گل جانب معشوق شتافت خیمه در کعبه دل کرد به پا کیست حسین آنکه با سعی و صفا کرد و وداع چو خلیل کرد آهنگ سفر سوی مینا کیست حسین محفل زینب محمل زینب منزل زینب شام بلا شد منزل زینب شام بلا شد منزل زینب شام بلا شد دختر زهرا زینب کبرا منزلش ایوای شام بلا شد شام بلا شد دختر زهرا زینب کبرا منزلش ایوای شام بلا شد شام بلا شد شام بلا شد زینب اطهر دختر حیدر منزلش آخر شام بلا شد زینب اطهر دختر حیدر زینب اطهر دختر حیدر منزلش آخر شام بلا شد 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 دخت مطهر با دل یخگر قسمتش آخر شام بلا شد دخت مطهر با دل یخگر قسمتش آخر شام بلا شام بلا شام بلا شد ناقه سواری مردم کوفه داغ یسیری شام بلا شد ناقه سواری مردم کوفه داغ یسیری شام بلا شد زینب دلخون بی کس و معزول وارد هامون شام بلا شد زینب دلخون بی کس و معزول وارد هامون شام بلا شد داغ برادر بر دل یخگر اسیر و اندر شام بلا شد داغ برادر بر دل یخگر اسیر و اندر شام بلا شد حدیث روایی گفتی حسینی شاهدی عینی شام بلا شد حدیث روایی گفتی حسینی شاهدی عینی شام بلا شد محفل زینب محمل زینب منزل زینب شام بلا شد دختر زهرا زینب کبرا منزل شیوای شام بلا شد یا حسین یا حسین یا
حسین
حسین
یا حسین
یا حسین
یا حسین یا
یا
حسین
حسین.
یا حسین بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے ہر زخم پہ شکرانہ زینب کے لبوں پر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا ایک گریہ خونی کی جاتی ہی نہیں لالی سجاد کی آنکھوں کو دیکھا ہی نہیں خالی یا خون ہے آنکھوں میں یا شام کا منظر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے وہ قلب تھے کیسے جو جان لے گئے سرور کی پتھر تو وہ ہے جس نے پتھر کی حیا رکھی اے سنگ حلب تجھ کو کیسے کہوں پتھر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے جو بڑے کے ہر ایک درہ خود پشت پہ کھاتی ہے خود خون میں نہاتی ہے زینب کو بچاتی ہے ہاں یہ ہے وہی فضا قمبر کی جو ہم سر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے کیوں ہائے حسینہ کا ایک شور سا اٹھتا ہے سرغازی کا نیزے سے کیوں خاک پہ گرتا ہے غازی کی بہن شاید بلوے پہ کھلے سر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے بازار ہے پتھر ہے زینب کا کھلا سر ہے اے شام غریباں سے پرہول بیاباں تک بازار سے کوفہ تک، دربار سے زندہ تک، بے رحم تماچے ہیں، بے رحم تماچے ہیں، اور شاہ کی دختر ہے. بازار ہے پتھر ہے، زینب کا کھلا سر ہے. بازار ہے پتھر ہے، زینب کا کھلا سر ہے. اختر نے خدا جانے کیا چھین لیا اس کا، ایک ہاتھ کلیجے پہ رہتا ہے دھرا جس کا، لگتا ہے مجھے شاید، لگتا ہے مجھے شاید یہ مادر اکبر ہے. بازار ہے پتھر ہے، زینب کا کھلا سر ہے. بازار ہے پتھر ہے، زینب کا کھلا سر ہے. ٹکراتی ہے سر اپنا، جائے تو کہاں جائے. معصوم سکینہ کو غش آئے کہ موت آئے، اس کے لیے زندہ میں، اس کے لیے زندہ میں بس خاک کا بستر ہے. بازار ہے پتھر ہے، زینب کا کھلا سر. حسین حسین حسین
یا
حسین
حسین،
حسین
یا حسین،
حسین حسین
حسین.
حسین.
اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على
محمد وعلى
محمد وعلى
محمد.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوسيين، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليكم سائر الشهداء كربلاء، خصوصا سيدي مولاي أبا الفضل العباس يا ابن أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليك يا سلطان يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى يا الرضا، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب الأسر والزمان، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسأل الله تعالى مخرجك وزهورك. السلام عليك وعلى آبائك الطيبين الطاهرين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلوات اللهم صل على
اللهم
محمد
صل
وآل
على
محمد.
محمد وآل محمد.
يا
Ya
علي.
Ali.
Inshallah, tomorrow, Urdu majlis at 1:45. See you guys tomorrow. And the next week, we'll start majlis after Maghrib at 8 o'clock, inshallah. Khuda Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Khuda.